One teacher from high school who I remember quite well is the man from whom I took geometry. I remember whenever he was up in front of the class teaching a lesson, he had this way of emphasizing his points by projecting his face outward like this. And then, as a way of sort of punctuating sentences and phrases, he would almost but not quite nod his head, kind of like this. Here's an example of how he used to sound.
Okay, today we're going to study the properties of the isosceles triangle. An isosceles triangle has two kinds of angles. There's an obtuse angle, which is always an angle greater than 90 degrees. And anytime an angle is less than 90 degrees, it's an acute angle.
Whenever I do this impression, I almost never fail to get a laugh, both from people who would have known him and even from people who would not have. But hey, if it weren't for him, I may never have learned the difference between an acute and obtuse angle. In the first verse of chapter 3 of the Epistle of James, the writer had this to say: "Not many of you should presume to become teachers, knowing that we who teach will be judged more strictly." Though James' point here in context was directed primarily to people who taught in the Christian church, I can see here a principle that could apply to all teachers more universally. Because of the high-profile nature of our job description, I think we'd all agree that because of who we are as teachers of world languages and other subjects, we too can be judged more strictly. Think about it. As people who are in a position to significantly influence the choices of others, for better or for worse, we are held to a very high standard. The dynamic with which we reckon is guided by expectations, sometimes actually quite a few. In some form or another, everyone around you seems to have an opinion about you. Opinions as such can be based on all kinds of factors. For instance, quirks and mannerisms observed of you as you teach, as with my geometry teacher. But sometimes, on a more sobering note, they are based on other factors. For some, opinions of you may be based more on what they've heard about you rather than knowing you personally. Sometimes it can come as blame for something not really having anything to do with you specifically. Take, for example, your effectiveness as a teacher being called into question simply because of your school's low scores in overall standardized testing for your state. Never mind the other factors that may be involved, such as the area in which your school is located, nature of student motivation, or perhaps their access to books in the library. As educators, sometimes we do end up getting summarily blamed for less than ideal circumstances in the system. Even so, when what's actually at fault is nothing having a whole lot to do per se with us, but really something more complicated. Like it or not, this spotlight of public opinion on each of us as teachers is out there for all kinds of reasons. In response to much of it, all we can really do is choose our battles. However, there is one area in which we must always keep ourselves in check. And this is in terms of the way we say things to others, especially our students. That's right. I'm talking about those wonderful, sweet, lovable, vulnerable, and impressionable young people, complete with their ways of sometimes really irritating us, annoying us, and otherwise putting us to the test. But whether we realize it or not, it is them over whom we have some of our most direct and lasting influence. Continuing from the verse I just quoted, what James has to say concerning the tongue is quite insightful. The tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Officially and unofficially, the criteria is out there when it comes to this. It can make a difference in terms of the kind of impact you will have on your students and others as a teacher. Will they revere you or will they write you off? What kind of example will you endeavor to set to those around you who are influenced by you? Not necessarily in the bigger situations involving major crisis or controversy, but more so in those everyday moments in which we are challenged more by the smaller things, which may happen more incidentally and in passing. They may often come up in a split second and are then gone a split second later. Right then, in the moment and on the fly, being more focused on the teaching process, perhaps we miss it. Only later, after the fact, do we then realize more fully what may actually have been at stake. Several years ago, when I was teaching middle school Spanish, I had one student with whom I was one day having some problems in the area of cooperation. In particular, it was the way she was sitting there sulking at me as I was trying to teach the lesson. Feeling at a loss in understanding as to exactly why this was going on, I grew increasingly frustrated with her. I finally lost my temper and ordered her to leave the classroom. Later, with the help of her homeroom teacher, I took her aside to apologize, and she forgave me. But it was still a mistake that ended up costing me in some other ways, specifically in terms of what others who were not involved had to say about it in reaction, particularly some of her classmates who saw her crying after she returned to the homeroom after I'd sent her out. This one other girl really used it as verbal ammo against me after becoming angry with me over an unrelated matter. And not to mention a very nasty letter I got from a parent of another student who had been present when I got angry. She gave me a real piece of her mind on why she was asking to have her son withdrawn from my class, naming this particular incident as one of the reasons. But I don't think I need to tell you how, from time to time, situations like this one do come up. After all, in our high-profile position, we are dealing with people, and people come in all shapes and sizes. With each one of them comes their own point of view. Entre cada dos orejas hay un mundo. Our students, their parents, our colleagues, administrators. Each of them, according to who they are as individuals, complete with their opinions of us based on how we come across, based on information that may be complete or incomplete, first-hand, second-hand, or maybe out of hand. Whether it's over certain quirks and mannerisms observed of us as we present our lesson, whether it's a situation involving a more pressing issue, one that needs to be dealt with. For example, a student's uncooperative attitude right in the middle of a lesson. In cases such as the latter example, before things can really move forward ideally, it has to be resolved. However, because of this strict standard to which we as teachers are held, it is preferable that things be so resolved in a manner as caring and diplomatic as possible. How do we go about it? What specific words will we choose as we handle it? What tone of voice or nonverbal communication can we use to express in the best way possible whatever we have to say? Is it still being said in love and in a way that still conveys to the student that we care about them? Communication is not only about what is said, but also exactly how it's understood. The way in which we communicate with others does make a difference in how we are perceived by others in our sphere of influence, both directly and indirectly, particularly with little everyday matters and how we respond to them. So, how will we be ready to respond to them in the best possible way? What steps will we have in place to take in order to remedy those times when we drop the ball? How will we acquire and exercise the necessary wisdom? In terms of the way we say things to others, particularly our students according to James chapter 3, what kind of difference might wisdom in this area make, both in the short term and the long term, in terms of the standard by which we as teachers are judged?